What happens to the PTP reference if the GPS reference source is unreliable?
It's a great question, Kevin. And this can happen a lot, especially with people with trucks going out to a venue, because in some cases, the trucks end up underneath of the stadium or underneath some other awning where you can't get GPS. So in a normal condition would be exactly like what we show here. You'd be looking at a perfect lock, lots of satellites, really good signal level. You'd be clock class 6, but when you can't get or you have unreliable GPS, it's going to fall out of lock and it's going to go into a stay in sync mode, and your primary generator is going to go to a clock class 7. Then if the second generator has a better clock class, it's going to walk over to it, but eventually it's going to fail because of the GPS being flaky, and you're going to get this toggle back and forth, and you definitely don't want that during any type of live programming. So one of the things that we need to think about in this design here is when we lose GPS, there needs to be a link, especially for trucks, between the two generators to be able to provide sync and lock the two generators, because normally they'd be locked to GPS. Well, when that GPS goes away, both of them are going to go into free run. And the last thing you want is the two PTP sources in free run and not absolutely phased with each other, counting time down in the microsecond, nanosecond range. So we need to add something to lock these. So if you use PAL Blackburst with VITSI on it, you'll take the time source from, in this case, the blue 4610, and you'll lock the red LT4610, and those two generators will now be absolutely perfectly in lockstep when when GPS is actually lost. So now the BMCA works, but one of the unique things here is going to be looking at how we set all of this up. So looking at this from another perspective here, we've got our satellite comes in, we've gone through the power up start, we do the listening, we do the BMCA, and it goes back and forth between these two units like we looked earlier. And we've added the clock class here. So if you look at the clock class on the unit on the right, his priority 2 is set to 1, so he becomes the Grand Master. And it is taking over. But going through this, if he loses GPS, it's not a big deal because the second generator has GPS. We're going to go through the same, they're still looking at the announce messages, and the unit now will start swapping announce messages, and the unit on the left now, since he has a better clock class, is going to take over and everybody is fine. The problem exists when both units, or you have no GPS available, or you get flaky GPS that's walking in and out. Then you're going to get that situation where the two can't talk to each other. And here you're going to have both of them set up. It's going to go back to the first unit on the right, but how long has he been out? And he's going to be the Grand Master, and it's going to go back to that unit because of priority 1, since they're both clock class 7. So we get into a unique situation here where, the whole 1588 was designed around both units being locked to a good sync source. So without GPS in both of them, they're no longer linked together. So we need to look at this and come up with a way to actually lock these two units together. Well, so in an outside broadcast setting, this can be a challenge to always have GPS. So we can lock the two together with PAL and VITSI. Now you will have to probably set a preset and go in and say, okay, go to the second setup, especially if you're going into a iffy situation, you want to start this and not try to rely on GPS that's flaky. And then lock the two units together. Well, so since the unit on the right is the Grandmaster, he's going to be sending black with VITSI on it so that we have a time-based lock on the unit on the left. But he's going to be on an internal oscillator, so he's going to be clock class 248. And the unit on the left, since he's locking to what it thinks is a better clock than internal fractionally, he's going to be clock class 220. So he's going to end up being the Grandmaster in this situation, even though he's locking off the unit on the right. BMCA will still work if the unit on the left completely fails. It will lock back to the unit on the right. So BMCA still works in this situation. It's just a little unique. The best way, as we see from the previous, would be to take and have a master lock source that is your clock coming from GPS, where you have this situation, and lock a third generator and then provide PTP from that generator down to the two generators on the bottom. That PTP passes the equivalent of GPS to the bottom two generators. So they're going to look like, from a clock class quality, that they are GPS locked. Now I can do the BMCA on those two units on the bottom. And even if I lose my clock or GPS on the top unit, he's still going to go into clock class 248, but he's still going to be sending PTP down to the two units at the bottom, so they're going to still have a stable clock coming into them. The unit on the top is in holdover, so he's still running on that clock, but the two units get exactly the same data, and now the BMCA between those two clocks is completely unaffected in this particular situation.
So just to clarify here, Steve, the third LT4610 that's been added to this, the master clock, is not part of the best master clock algorithm. It's not being polled. It can't be selected as the Grandmaster. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. If you look at the domains, it's a different domain feeding the two units down below, and then their output will be on the domain that will be your truck's domain. The domain out of the first one is just the domain to lock the two units, and it's not part of that BMCA polling, but it just gives the same stable clock to both units, so that it's the equivalent of GPS lock from the BMCA. It will work between the two units as expected. And this even works with a flaky GPS, and it doesn't ripple down through the system like each unit being locked and one unit falling out of GPS first than the other unit, or both units coming in and out of GPS. So it's a much better way to do it.